أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. If you open page 11, we continue our discussion into the types of water that we have. For us to know whether water is pure or not, how does it become najis, how does it become impure or not, we need to know what type of water are we dealing with in Islamic law. Now in Islamic law, we have several types of plain water. We spoke about ma' al-mutlaq, plain water, and we spoke about ma' al-mudaf, which is mixed water. But let's examine now plain water. We have several types of plain water. Now for you to determine whether water becomes najis or not, it becomes impure or not, you have to know what type of water are you dealing with. So let's outline the types of water that we have. Plain water. We have three types of plain water. And each of these categories has slightly different rulings. The first type is rainwater, water that comes from the sky. The second type is a water that has a source, and we'll explain that. And the third type is kur water, or we call it qalil water. Is it kur or is it qalil? The first type is rainwater. Water that comes down from the sky does not have to have a certain amount of quantity for it to purify. If there's some blood on your hands, you put it under rainwater. A few drops of rain, wash it away, your hand is clean. So we see that in Islamic law, rainwater is highly, it has the capacity to purify very quickly. You don't need any amount of water. Doesn't have to be attached. Just some raindrops fall on a certain area. They wash that area automatically becomes clean.
How about polluted rainwater in the factory area with the air pollution?
Even if the water is polluted, as long as we still consider it to be rainwater, plain water.
Like jari? It wouldn't be my jari with matar.
It's not jari, but it's matar. We'll talk about my jari. Rainwater, as long as it's rainwater and people consider it to be rainwater, it's not like black or, sometimes it's so polluted where the water is just black, literally black. No, maybe we will not consider that plain water. But we're talking about average rain. Even in polluted cities, the water is not black, right? Maybe it changes color a little bit, but it's still rainwater.
So if it hits the roof and then comes down, like it's washing the roof?
If it hits the roof and it's come down, and you no longer are seeing the najasa, the blood, for example. Now, if you see the blood is still there, the color of the blood is with it, that's najis, of course, because the najasa is there. But let's say it washes your roof, and then you don't see any trace of the najasa. That automatically purifies it. Or when it comes to your hand, there's a drop of blood on your hand, just put it 3 seconds under the rain, you no longer see the drop of blood. That makes it tahir. This is an attribute, a characteristic of what? Of rainwater.
So would the law of continuity apply if you are in doubt whether it is really clean or not?
Well, as long as you don't see the najasa, it's clean.
No,
it's just by visual determination. Yes, if you always have doubt, you have to consider it najis because of the law of continuity. Because you knew for sure, before you put it under the rainwater, it was najis. Now you have doubt whether the rainwater purified it, such as you see some color, you're not sure what this color is. In that case, you have to apply the law of continuity and assume it's still najis. But let's say it's very clear to you visibly. I don't see any trace of the najasa. It's just gone. That blood is gone. Then you consider it to be pure. So water purifies everything. The roads, the pavement, the grass, it purifies everything.
Sometimes the rainwater, if it falls on your hands, it's mixed with dust or something, it's still pure?
Even if the rainwater is mixed with dust, pollutants, anything else, it's still considered rainwater and it still purifies. Let's say if you go to some areas that the air is a little bit sandy or dusty, like desert areas. Obviously the rainwater will contain some sand with it. Even the color could be, not so clear. That is still considered rainwater. Until it gets to the point where it's just mud falling. Like in a very severe sandstorm, where it's just mud falling on people, okay, that's no longer rainwater. It's no longer plain water. People consider that to be a type of mixed water. So that's the first type. And then we will read the hadith that corresponds to it. The second type is any water that has a source. What does that mean? Like a spring of water that has a source to it. Now the water that's coming from the spring, it does not matter if it's a lot of water like a river, a stream that's flowing from a spring, or it's just a small little stream. You have the small flow of water. It does not matter. Scholars consider this to be a water that has a source. Now in Arabic, they would call this lahu madda. Madda means source. So this water has a source, such as a spring water. A well, for example, water that you find in the well has a source. Because you take from it, it fills up. It's connected to some other source, like the aquifer under the ground, the water table under the ground. So well water is also a type of water that has a source.
Sometimes groundwater is polluted.
It could be polluted, yes, but as long as it's plain water, you're not seeing any najasa in it, it's fine. That's considered pure.
Let's say you have like in gas stations, for instance, there's water around there, and when you drill, there's oil in that water.
Even if there is some oil in the water, does it become mixed water, or people still consider it mutlaq? What do the people consider it? As long as you consider it plain water, even if it's contaminated, you could still wash away the najasa with it. Yeah, you wouldn't drink it, obviously. We don't drink these days. We're so spoiled, we'll only drink this, right? But does that mean only this can purify you and remove the blood? No. Imagine what people would drink in the past. Today you would not drink from a river, trust me. Even a lake, freshwater lake, you would not drink from it. But these are all pure sources of water that can purify your body and purify you from any najasa. So it doesn't matter, what the quantity of the water is. It's a small little stream that's flowing, it's a huge river, doesn't matter. If it has a source, it's considered water that has a source. Scholars have another way to describe this. They call it al-ma' al-jari. What does jari mean? Running or flowing water. Running water, flowing water. They consider this al-ma' al-jari. If it has a source. As long as it has a source, they consider it ma' al-jari or lahu madda. What's special about this type of water? What's special about this type of water, if you see a small stream flowing and it has a source, if something najis, something impure falls in it, does it contaminate all the water or just that particular area? Just that particular area. Now if you remove that najis and the water continues to flow and you don't see the najasa in that particular part, it goes back to its purity. Whereas if you have standing water, if you have still water, standing or still water, if you have standing or still water, if one drop of najasa falls in it, what happens? All of it becomes najis. So this is a difference between water that has a source and water that does not have a source. It's standing, it's still water. Any water that has no source, let's say you have a stream of water running, but it really doesn't have a source. Somebody opened the faucet, they were washing the hillside, and you saw the stream coming. You're like, oh, now I have flowing water. The minute any najasa falls in it, that flowing water becomes najis, contaminated, if it does not have a source. But if it does have a source, you can always consider it to be pure. And there are other differences we will discuss, inshallah. Let's say if you have clothes that have urine on them, it depends with which type of water you're washing them. If you're washing them with a water that has source, you just wash them once and squeeze them, and what? They become tahir. But if you have standing or still water, you have to pour water on them, let's say 2 times, and squeeze them 2 times for them to be purified. So there's many differences. We will discuss them, inshallah. And then the third type of water is what? You have standing water. It's not connected to any source. But you divide that water into kur, a large amount of water, or a small amount of water. If it's a large amount of water, like a swimming pool, for example, a swimming pool pretty much has the same laws of a water that has a source. If 1 drop of blood falls in the swimming pool, does it automatically make all of it najis? No, it does not. Just that affected area, you consider it najis. And if you remove the najasa, the color is no longer visible, then you consider all the swimming pool to be tahir. Whereas if you have a bucket of water, some small standing water, if 1 najasa, 1 single drop falls in it, it makes all of it najis. And you can no longer use it to do wudu or to purify yourself or to drink it. Because it's haram to drink water that has been made najis.
Because of the size.
Because of the size. Now, kur or qaleel, it does not have a source. It's just a body of water. If it's more than a certain amount, we call it a kur. And if it's less than that amount, we call it qaleel. Qaleel in Arabic means small, a small amount of water. So the difference between these two is that water that is kur, if a small najasa falls in it, it does not make it all najis. Whereas if the water is qaleel and you have some najasa falling into it, it makes it najis.
So what quantity qualifies for it to be?
We'll discuss the quantity. It has to do with how you measure it with your hands. It's a certain volume that we look at. So these are basically the 3 types of water. Let's now examine the text. So on page 11, in the middle of the page, you see the heading Al-Ma'un Nabi'. We said Al-Nabi' means what?
Page 13.
Yes, look at page 11. Al-Ma'un Nabi' wa Ghayrun Nabi'. Is that page 13? Okay, I think I have a different version here. So yes, then page 13. Al-Ma'un Nabi' wa Ghayr an-Nabi'. You see that? Okay. Next time I will have the same version that you have, but I still have the older one because I have some notes on it. So al-ma' an-nabi', water that springs from the ground, emanates from the ground, is the second type of water. It's water that has a source. It's al-ma' al-jari. So the author explains. He starts with a hadith by Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. عن الإمام الصادق عليه السلام أنه قال لا بأس بأن يبول الرجل في الماء الجاري. The Imam says, we don't have an issue, no problem, if a person makes water that is jari, makes water that is running impure, such as by urinating in it. So if you have a stream of water that's flowing, and let's say someone contaminates it in that manner, does this make the whole stream najis? The Imam says no. La ba'sa, it does not make it najis. We don't have an issue there. وَكُرِهَ أَنْ يَبُولَ فِي الْمَاءِ الرَّاكِدِ. However, if the water is rakid, what does rakid mean? Standing or still water? The Imam says no. It's not recommended for him to do that because then you'll make the water najis and you can't use it. It's just like wasting the water. So the Imam ﷺ was bringing this idea to their attention, especially people who lived in the deserts, right? And especially in the past, people did not really have public baths in many areas. So the Imam ﷺ says, if you're dealing with running water, like a stream, like a river, it does not make it najis. But if you are dealing with standing water, still water, then it does make it najis. And you have an issue with it. And you no longer can use it because it makes it najis. Now the author says, الماء الجاري في اللغة ما يجري على الأرض. He says water that is jari. Why is he focusing on the word jari? Because the Imam mentions the word in the hadith, right? You see the hadith of the Imam? He says, في الماء الجاري. A person contaminates water that is jari. Do you see the word jari in the hadith of the Imam? So al-jari linguistically in Arabic means water that is flowing. Running water on the face of the earth, on the ground. Al-ma'ul jari fil lugha ma yajri. He says linguistically water that's flowing is any water that's flowing on the ground, whether it has a source or it doesn't have a source. As long as water is flowing, in Arabic we call it flowing water. And standing or still water is any water that is not flowing. However, when scholars say al-ma' al-jari, flowing water, what do they mean? They mean water that has a source. Not just any water that is flowing. A water that has a source, they call it ma' al-jari. So now you have a different meaning in Islamic law than the linguistic meaning. The linguistic meaning in Arabic, jari means any water that flows. It has a source, it doesn't have a source. There's a large quantity of water flowing, there's a small quantity, it doesn't matter. It's called ma' al-jari, flowing water. But in Islamic law, in the book of Fiqh, when they tell you ma' al-jari, what do they mean, the scholars? It's running water that has a what? That has a source. Or, it doesn't have to be running. Any water like a well is not running water, right? But it has a source. So scholars, when they say ma' al-jari, really they are referring to any water that has a source. Like a spring. Whether it's actually flowing or not flowing, it doesn't matter. As long as it has a source, they will consider it to be al-ma'ul jari. So, how do we know this? The author, he says, وَقَالَ صَاحِبُ الْمَدَارِكِ. Sahib al-Madarik was a previous scholar, centuries ago. What does he say? Al-murad bil-jari al-nabi'. What we mean by flowing water is water that is nabi', that has a source. So scholars have a different meaning for ma' al-jari than the linguistic meaning. So he's just pointing that out. Because sometimes you will, take a book of rulings and you hear the word jari. You're like, oh, okay, that's any water that's flowing. He's saying no. It's not just any water that's flowing. It's any water that has a what? Source. That has a source. So this is what he explains in this paragraph. And he says this is an expression that scholars have made, that you will find in Islamic law. And for any water that does not have a source, even if it's flowing, you don't consider that to be jari. Even if it's flowing. But as long as it does not have a source, like the example we mentioned, someone on a hillside, gets a bucket of water and he is washing the hillside. You get water that's flowing. But scholars will not consider it to be a water that flows. Now what's the effect? If one drop of najasa falls in that water on the hillside, it makes it all najis. Whereas if it had a source, it does not become najis. Is this clear?
Or another example would be circulating water, the water which is circulating in the pipe, the pressurized.
Okay, so the faucet water that we have, the tap water, there are some differences amongst the scholars, but the majority of scholars will treat it as core water, the third type.
Big quantity.
Yes, big quantity, because it's attached to a pool of water, that the city has made available, and it's connected to it, right? The water is connected to that source that the city makes available.
Yeah, but the city is also connecting that source to a lake or a river.
That's fine. So then it's connected to water that has a source. But usually they isolate it. They get the water from the river, from the lake, they put it in a treatment center like a big pool, and then they give it to the households. Now, if you know that it's connected to the lake, then not only is it core water, but it's also water that has a source. So tap water, most scholars will treat it as one of these two categories. The third one or the second one, which makes life a lot easier for us. It's very easy to purify things with that type of water.
So if faucet water is considered as core water, let's say someone is like the example of the hill. Someone has a faucet open at the very top of the hill, water is flowing down. Isn't all of that still considered core?
As long as, so the question is, if someone opens the faucet water on the hill and you get the water flowing, isn't that considered core water? If it's attached, if that water that is flowing is attached to that tap water, then yes, you treat it all as core water. But if it disconnects, meaning you open the tap water and then it hits the ground and then it kind of disconnects from the main source, then no, it becomes ma'al qalil. So it depends if it's attached or not. That's why some scholars have a problem with this shower. You know the showers that we have? It takes the water which is connected to each other, and then it makes these small little, streams. What do you call them? You know the shower head, right? Is that connected or no?
It has a source.
It does have a source, but does it disconnect it or not? Some scholars have an issue. You will see them considering this to be qalil water, which is pure, it's fine, but to purify, it's weaker than the core water. But if you know for sure that, I know it's still very small, you've got these, 20 holes from which the water is coming, but it's still connected. If you're sure that it's connected, you can treat it as core water.
What about jetted water and pulsated?
If it's jetted water, if it's jetted water, that's fine. It's still connected.
But there is a separation in the process.
Okay, if it separates it, then it becomes qalil. That's the problem. So it really also depends on the type of shower. Now, some scholars, the minority of them, some scholars, this is just for you to know. Let's say we say the shower head is disconnected from the main source. It's like kind of pulsated. Or when you get all these, small holes, you disconnect it. Some water consider it to be a type of rainwater, because it falls just like the rain. Especially you've seen these huge big shower heads that they're producing these days, they're big squares. You feel like you're under the rain. Some scholars these days are starting to treat that like rainwater. Now, why does that make a difference when it comes to ghusl? When it comes to your ghusl, you have to wash your head first, then the right side, then the left side. Except if you're doing ghusl where? In rainwater. If you're doing ghusl in rainwater, you do the niyyah for the ghusl and you wash all of your body simultaneously. You don't have to do the right before the left, the head before the body. So if we consider the shower head to be a type of rainwater, you no longer have to observe that sequence in ghusl. You could just wash your body all at once and you're done with your ghusl. Just like if you dive in a swimming pool. So it makes a difference how we treat this water, right? You see the details and the consequences that emerge from, just considering this type of water. Is it core water? Is it jari? Is it rainwater? This makes a big difference, how you classify all these types of water. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Islamic law.
Some Maraja, they say you have to wash your head, neck, then your body.
Yeah, so those maraja that tell you have to wash your head, neck, and your body, they're assuming that you are doing ghusl not with rainwater. And you're not obviously diving in a swimming pool. You're doing ghusl tartibi, a type of ghusl in which you do it step by step. sequence by sequence, which is either from small water, or you take, just the tap water and you wash yourself.
Even in the shower.
Yeah, in the shower, like I said, most scholars don't consider the shower to be rainwater. That's why they say you have to do it by tartib, by sequence. You have to wash the head first, the neck, and then the right side, and then the left side. But if you follow a marja who says, to me, the shower is like rainwater, what's the consequence of that? What's the effect? You no longer have to do the sequence, because you treat it as rainwater. And whenever you do ghusl under rainwater, you don't have to observe any sequence. Your body gets wet, it's washed, you're done with your ghusl.
So they treat it like rainwater because it comes down like rainwater?
Because they say it has the features of rainwater. It's coming down at once like rain. So they consider, you know what, this is like rainwater. So it has the features of rainwater. Now, let's examine these types of water. Do they become najis or no? If you have a big pool of water, you have water that's running, water that has a source, can it become najis or no? This is what we discuss in the next heading, al-ma' wa mulaqat an-najis. What does al-ma' mean? Water. What does mulaqat mean? Meeting. When something comes into contact with something else, something that touches something else. This is called mulaqat, meeting. And then najasa, or encounter. Najasa is impurity. So water and meeting impurities. This is the subject of this next paragraph. Just so we understand the words being used here. Al-ma' wa mulaqat an-najis. So mulaqat means to meet, najis is the najasa. تواتر عن الرسول الأعظم صلى الله عليه وآله. Says, اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. He said it has come in a mutawatir hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. For those who attended the science of hadith, can someone explain to us what does mutawatir mean? The hadith that is mutawatir, what does it mean? Successive. Can you elaborate on what a successive hadith is?
It comes from more than one narrator, many narrators, reliable narrators.
So a mutawatir hadith is a hadith that has been narrated by so many narrators to the point where you have yaqeen and certainty that the Prophet said it. It's not possible for them to have made this up, to have conspired, to have decided, you know what, let's just accuse the Prophet of saying this. They come from different backgrounds, just random people who did not meet with each other to conspire. So this is one mutawatir hadith, a hadith that has been narrated by so many companions. And whether you're Sunni, you're Shia, you recognize this as a mutawatir hadith. It has so many sources in our hadith book that you can be certain the Prophet must have said it. It's not impossible for all these narrators to have made it up. What does this hadith say? This hadith, what is it? خَلَقَ اللَّهُ الْمَاءَ طَهُورًا. What does khalaqa mean? He created. Who's the subject? Who created? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ma'a. Allah created water. What does tahura mean? Pure. Okay. Here's the important point. La yunajjisuhu shay. Nothing makes it najis. La means no. It does not. Yunajjisuhu shay. Nothing makes it najis. Except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions three things. إلا ما غير طعمه أو لونه أو رائحته. What does طعمه mean? Taste. رائحة, smell. لون, color. So we have three things. طعم, رائحة, لون. The Prophet ﷺ says, water is pure. Nothing contaminates it in the sense that it makes it najis, except if one of three changes. إِلَّا أَن يُغَيِّرَهُ. Unless something changes it. Either its taste changes, طعم is taste, or its رائحة. رائحة is its smell. Number 3, its lawn, its color. So if the color of the water changes, the smell of the water changes, the taste of the water changes, then that part of the water is najis. So if you have a river, and in one part of the river you've got the color of blood, it's red, that part is najis. Or it has the smell of blood, very distinct smell of blood, it's najis. Or you have what? The taste. It tastes like blood. You don't see any color, you don't detect any smell, but when you taste it, it tastes like blood. That you consider najis, that part of it. The other unaffected areas, that's fine. We consider them to be tahir. Yes?
So like, we all know the taste of blood is like metallic. But if there's like iron and stuff like that in the water,
So anything...
that makes it taste sort of like blood.
So anything that people consider to be having the taste of blood. Or let's say alcohol, which is najis. It tastes like wine, tastes like alcohol. That affected area will be najis. So whatever the people consider it. Now if the water is high in iron, and let's say that somehow makes it taste like blood, what do the people consider it? If the people say, look, we are detecting the taste of blood here. I don't care about iron or any other element. It tastes like blood. Now, if this taste was caused by a najasa, we're not saying, let's say you have water that, let's say has some elements that make it taste like blood. That water is still pure. But let's say najasa fell in it. You saw that najasa fell in it, blood fell in it, and one of these 3 changed. You consider that area of the water to be what? To be najis.
Okay, there's some water that has sulfuric acid, which is bad egg smell. Does that make it najis?
No, that does not make it najis. We'll look at the conditions. When does it become najis? So the Prophet says, إِلَّا مَا غَيَّرَ طَعْمَهُ أَوْ لَوْنَهُ أَوْ رَائِحَتَهُ. That makes it najis. Another hadith. See, the author is showing us hadiths that support this view or support this Islamic law. وعن الإمام الصادق عليه السلام أنه قال إن كان الماء قد تغير. If it's the case that water changed ريحه in terms of its smell أو طعمه in terms of its taste فلا تشرب. The Imam says don't drink. وَلَا تَتَوَضَّأْ مِنْهُ. Don't do wudu from it. Don't wash yourself from it. وَإِن لَمْ يَتَغَيَّرْ رِيحُهُ. If you saw a drop of blood falling in that swimming pool, falling in that river, but nothing changed. رِيحُهُ did not change, its smell. Its taste did not change. فَاشْرَبْ وَتَوَضَّأْ. The Imam says drink from it, you can do wudu. Because you didn't see any visible changes to the water. Now you could say, but scientifically I know the blood is there somewhere. It's fine. It does not make it najis. Because it's negligible. It's so negligible, it did not change the smell, it did not change the taste, it did not change the color to a visible, detectable point, then it's tahir. Now you could tell me, but if I take the water to the lab and I analyze it under the microscope, I can see the color change. That doesn't count. It has to be by the visible eye. If it changes by the visible eye, then you consider it to be najis. That part is najis. Another hadith from the Imam alayhi salam, عن الإمام الرضا alayhi salam. He says, ماء البئر, the water of a well. Bi'r is what in Arabic? Well. Any well is called bi'r. Or the common way of pronouncing it is bir. People say bir, but in Arabic it's bi'r. Now not the English beer. That has a different meaning. Ma'ul bi'ri wasi'. The Imam says the water of a well is vast. It's big. La yufsiduhu shay. Nothing can corrupt it, meaning make it najis. إلا أن يتغير ريحه, unless if its smell changed, أو طعمه, or its taste changes, فينزح. What does ينزح mean? That means you have to take water out from the well until you remove the contaminated water and the new water fills in the well such that you no longer detect the smell or the taste. So yunzah means you take water from the well. You take out water from the well. You extract water out of the well. Because if you take, water out of the well, you remove the najasa, that area which is contaminated, and new water comes into the well. حتى يذهب الريح ويطيب الطعم. The Imam says keep extracting water from the well until you no longer can smell the najasa from it. The Imam says something very key over here. لأن له مادة. Why? We ask you, O Imam, why do you say that this water becomes pure? Because it has a source. Because the Imam says this phrase, scholars said anything that has a source has the same attributes and features. If najasa falls in it, you don't say automatically it's najis. If it changed the color, it becomes najis. And if the color, you remove the color, it becomes tahir again. What's the proof of all of this? The words of Al-Imam Al-Rida alayhi salam. He gives us the reasoning, the philosophy. He says because it has a source. And whenever the Imam or the Prophet in a hadith tells you the reasoning, then you can take that reasoning and apply it to other cases. And you can safely say any water that has a source, whether it's well water or running water or anything else, it has the same characteristics and features. Because the Imam told us, why do we treat a well water like that? Because it has a source. So we know that the real hukum, the real ruling is around what? Water that has a source. And the Imam used well water as just an example. In Arabic we call this the illah, the reasoning for a hukum, the reasoning for an Islamic law. And the Imam, he himself is mentioning the illah. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the author says, if we get water that has a najasa that falls into it, we have three scenarios. إذا وقع في الماء نجاسة. If you have najasa that falls in water, فَلِذَلِكَ حَالَات. You have several scenarios. حالات means scenarios, conditions, or states. The first one is that the water stays pure if there are no changes to it. أن تقع النجاسة في الماء في ماء نابع. Water that has a source. ولا يتغير بسببها لونه ولا طعمه ولا ريحه. You have water that has a source and a najasa falls in it, but nothing changes. The taste doesn't really change. The smell doesn't change, like a swimming pool. And that's one example. Even though a swimming pool doesn't have a source, but it's core water. If you have a drop of blood falling in a swimming pool, does it change the color of the swimming pool? No. Does it change the taste of the water? No. Does it change the smell of the water? No. Just one drop. He says this water is pure. Yes, brother?
Don't pools usually have chlorine in it?
They do have chlorine in it, but does that make it mixed water, or people still consider it plain water? It's still considered plain water. So we treat it as plain water, even if it has chlorine in it. That's fine. People still consider it as a type of plain water. It's not like a juice, right?
Yeah.
So, in this first paragraph, in state number 1 or scenario number 1, he says that any water that has a source, whether the quantity of the water is big or small, doesn't matter. As long as it has a source, if a najasa falls in it, and it does not change one of these three, smell, color, taste, what do you consider the water?
Pure.
Completely pure. Even if you know for sure that the najasa is still in there. And you could tell yourself, look, if I drink all this water, I know that blood will be ingested by me. It's still fine. Islamically, you could drink it. You could do wudu with it. It's considered pure. That's the first state, or the first scenario. Any questions about this first scenario? Okay, let's go to the second one, number 2. أن تقع النجاسة في الماء. The najasa falls. تقع means what? Falls into the water. ويتغير طعمه. Its taste changes. لونه. Its color changes. أو ريحه. Or its smell changes. What happens in this case if one of these three change? فإنه ينجس بالاتفاق. He says we have 2 proofs that this becomes najis. The first proof is ittifaq. What does the word ittifaq in Arabic mean? Agreement, consensus, ijma'. The consensus of scholars is that if one of these 3 changes, the water becomes what? Najis. That's number 1. Number 2, وَلِلرِّوَايَةِ الْمُتَقَدِّمَةِ. And for the hadith, the riwayah that we just mentioned, he mentioned 3 narrations, one by the Prophet, one from Imam al-Sadiq, one from Imam al-Rida, right? He says these 3 narrations tell us that whenever one of these 3 changes, it becomes najis. So these are 2 proofs. And if you don't accept the riwayah for whatever reason, even though one of them is mutawatir, then ijma', the consensus of scholars, is that this becomes najis. And this doesn't matter whether the water is big in quantity, small in quantity, it's flowing, it's not flowing, it has a source, it doesn't have a source. Any water that you can visibly see it changed by the najasa, obviously you can't drink it. Obviously you can't do wudu with it, right?
But in
that particular area, yes. Now if the water is little, all of it becomes najis, even those unaffected areas. If it's big, only the affected areas become najis. But the point is, can you drink water that's color has been changed? And the color is still changed right now. Can you drink it? No, you cannot. Can you do wudu with it? Wudu with it? No, you cannot. So this is the second type. Now, there are 3 conditions that we will mention. When does a water become najis? When its color changes, or its smell changes, or its taste changes. There are 3 conditions. We'll end with these conditions. Let's pay attention to these conditions, they're important conditions. He says, وَاشْتَرَطَ الْفُقَهَاء. What does that mean? First of all, what does fuqaha mean? Scholars of Islamic law, we call them what? Fuqaha. Shtarata means what? They have stipulated as a condition, because shart in Arabic means what? Condition. So when he says ishtarat al-fuqaha, he is telling us that the scholars, the majority of them, or literally all scholars, they have mentioned these conditions. What are they? Number 1, this water that is affected by the najasa, it should be affected by coming into direct contact with the water. If there is no direct contact and it was still able to influence it, it does not make it najis. An example, you have standing or still water and you have a carcass next to it, the body of a dead animal that is rotten. You've seen the stench that comes from it? Let's say that stench affects the standing water that is a yard away from it. But that dead body does not touch the water. There's no mulaqat. It doesn't meet the water. It doesn't encounter the water. But the stench of it changes the smell of the water. Does that make the water najis? No. Because the first criteria for it to become najis is that the najasa came into direct contact with it. Or let's say you have a pool of blood just next to that standing water. And the smell of the blood is so strong, it was able to change the smell of the standing water. It made it smell like blood. Does that make it najis? No, it does not make it najis. Yes, brother?
What if the water smells like metal?
Even if the water smells like metal, that does not make it najis.
Taste too?
Even if it tastes like, as long as the najasa did not directly come into contact with it, it stays pure. You could say, but I'm smelling the blood. It's okay. The blood didn't come into contact with it directly, so it did not make it najis. That's the first condition. What is the second condition? The second condition is that we said if the water changes color after meeting the najasa, if the water changes color, what happens to it? Is it pure or it becomes najis? It becomes najis. That area that's affected becomes impure, right? Which color are we talking about? The color of the najis, not the color of the mutanajjis. We have two things. We have najis and we have mutanajjis. They sound similar, right? Can someone tell us the difference between these two? What's the difference between najis and mutanajjis?
Contamination
Is
and
when
contaminated.
impure or contaminated, and the najis is the one that is made.
Right. Najis is the impurity itself, blood, urine, the 10 impurities that we have, which we will discuss. That najis is the source of that impurity, the blood itself, the urine itself. What do we call that? Najis. The mutanajjis is that liquid which was contaminated by the najis. So if I have a bottle of water and a drop of blood comes into contact with it, the water, the clear water becomes what? Becomes red, right? But that redness is from what? From the blood. So I treat this as what? As najis. But let's say I have honey. I have a jar of honey. What's the color of honey?
Yellow.
Yellow. Let's give another example. I have a bottle of juice, orange juice. What's the color of it? Orange. A drop of blood falls into that. Now you have juice that is what? Contaminated. What do we call the juice? We call the juice mutanajjis. The juice is technically not najis because it's not blood. Only the 10 najasat are najis. Blood is najis. Urine is najis. The other najasat are najis. The 10 that we will discuss later. But the orange juice itself is not najis because orange juice is just not najis. It's mutanajjis. It has been made impure because it touched blood. So do you see the difference between najis, which is blood, and mutanajjis, which is the orange juice which has been contaminated? Orange juice by itself is not najis, right? It needs something to make it najis. But blood, does something else have to make it najis, or it's automatically just najis? It's automatically just najis. So anything that automatically by its nature is najis, we call it what? Najis. And anything which by its nature is not najis, but because of a najasa it becomes najis, by contacting that najasa, we call it what? Mutanajjis.
So could we say that a najis thing can make other things najis, but a mutanajjis can't make other things?
A mutanajjis can, but it has slightly different rules. But here in the condition that we're discussing, here's the difference. Let's say I have a pool of water, and I get that orange juice which is contaminated, and I pour the orange juice into one corner of the pool. When you look at that corner, you see it yellow. So the color changed into what? Yellow. Does this make it najis? No, because the color yellow is the color of what?
Orange.
It's the color of orange juice. It's not the color of blood. And the color of the najasa makes the pool najis, not the color of the mutanajjis. So when a color changes, you have to examine which color changed. Is it because the juice is yellow and that's what made the pool change? Or when you taste that corner, it tastes like orange juice. Does that make it najis? No. As long as you're not detecting the color of blood, or the taste of blood, or the smell of blood, it's considered pure. But you could say, look, the orange juice is all over the place in the pool. It's okay. As long as you're not detecting the original najis which made the orange juice najis, then it's pure.
So you have a primary najis and you have secondary najis.
We could call it primary or secondary. If the color that changed was changed by the primary one, that area is najis. If it was changed by the secondary one, what do you consider it? It's tahir, it's pure.
So if the,
Does this make sense? Is this clear?
instead of example of say orange juice, if I take a pomegranate juice which is red in color and which is poured in water, so the color changes.
Okay, let's say if you have pomegranate juice, which is red, it looks like blood. And when you see the color, is it the color of blood or is it the color of pomegranate? If you're sure it's the color of blood, let's say you had a way to figure out which color it was. If you're sure it's the color of blood, you consider it najis. If you're sure that it's the color of pomegranate, you consider it pure. What if you have shak? You have doubt. If you have doubt, you can assume it's not the color of blood through the law of continuity. Because a second ago there was no color of blood there. I don't know now after this redness if the color of blood is there. You apply the law of continuity and you say it's pure and inshallah it's not blood. Is this clear? Is this complicated? Yes, brother.
So basically, if something is najis, but it's not originally mutanajis, it goes into something pure, it doesn't mean it's najis.
If it goes into something pure, what type of water is it? Is it like a swimming pool?
Yeah, like a swimming pool.
If it's a big swimming pool and you get a najis in it or a mutanajjis in it, which one?
Mutanajis.
If you get a mutanajjis in it, but the najis, the original najis, the primary one, you can't detect it anymore. It does not contaminate. However, if I have orange juice, that is mutanajjis. A drop of blood fell in orange juice, in a container of orange juice. Does that make it najis?
Yes.
It makes it najis. If you have orange juice and one single drop falls in it, it makes it najis, and it becomes what? Mutanajjis. If this mutanajjis touches my water bottle, it falls into this little water, qaleel, it makes this najis as well. Because this is qaleel water. Whereas we were discussing water that has a source, right? We're discussing water that's khur, or it's running water. But if you're dealing with water that is qaleel, it makes it najis. So this was the second condition. And the third condition, very briefly, that change, we already discussed this, that change that happens in the water, in its color, in its taste, in its smell, it has to be palpable and visible to your senses. So don't take the water to the lab and tell me, look, I could see the traces of blood. It doesn't count.
You can't physically see it.
As long as you physically, with your senses, you can't see the blood, you can't really smell the blood, you can't really taste the blood, you assume that the blood is just not there. Because obviously if a blood falls in a swimming pool, it's not going to evaporate. It gets mixed with the water. You can trace it in a lab, right? Small parts in every drop of water. That doesn't count in Islamic law. In Islamic law, that's negligible. As long as with your physical senses you can detect it, you consider it to be tahir. So if in your swimming pool, a drop of blood falls, in fact, let's say a cup of blood falls, or let's say a child goes and urinates in it. You come 10 minutes later, you don't detect anything in the swimming pool. I don't smell anything. I don't see any color changes, the color of urine. According to Islamic law, what do you consider the swimming pool? All of it tahir. All of it pure. Remember, Allah wants to make this easy for us. Because if you want to consider the lab, if somebody puts a small najasa in Lake Erie or Ontario or Superior, you make all of it najis there because scientifically you could trace it, right?
But in swimming pool where kids go and they do that.
It's still considered tahir. For the purposes of wudu, ghusl, yeah, it's good, for hygienic purposes to find a better water source. But for the sake of making this easy for us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this pure. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.